Now, this hands-on exercise talks about create a new data lake object to store multiple identifiers. I'd rather do the other one first because it has limited number of email addresses, and then we'll come limited number of columns, and then we'll come back to identifier. So create a new data lake object to store multiple email addresses of customer as email address list. The fields should be party, email address key, and email address. Add the new DLO to the default space. And while we are doing the data transformation, we have to filter each of the primary keys. So these are the steps how you're going to do it. I'd rather do it than talk about it. I'm into Data Cloud at this point. Just to reemphasize, this is the same Data Cloud here. We did created our data streams greater than equals to today. Would be right. If I go to all data streams, yes, you have AWS customers, order headers, order line items, products, cases, contacts, contact identifier, parking reservation, parking spaces. And if you have a look at it, all of them have data at this point in time. Previously, when we did, some had data, some did not. But today, definitely every every data stream that we created and every data lake has data. I'm going to go to AWS S3 customers and make sure you're able to visualize the data first. So this is the source DLO for us to perform transformation. And this you have customer alternate email address, customer primary email address, rewards number, and you will also have passport number to start with. Now I'll click on more and I'll find data transformations. I have a data transformation in here, and I do not have any transformations yet. So I'm going to go ahead and click on new. Now, there are a few steps which we need to remember. When looking for data transformation, we discussed about how there are two kinds of data transformations, batch data transformation and streaming data transformation. For our case, because we are bringing data from Amazon connector, naturally the data will be batch data transformed. If you're bringing data from websites, from ingestion API in near real time, from apps or anywhere else, we are going to lean on to streaming data transform, but not batch data transform. I'll click on next. Now, in this situation, we have two objects to look at, either data lake objects or data model objects. The batch data transform can work on both. I'm going to choose data lake objects because our data at this point in time is residing within data lake objects. I'll click on next, and that should take us to a visual builder where we can perform a data transformation. Now on the screen, this is a visual builder for data transformation. The first thing that we have to do is select an input. I can select an input, which again will be your data lake object. Now, before I actually go ahead and start it, I realized we also have to create a data lake object for storing the email address list. If you remember in our session, we discussed that the source and target cannot be the same. So if I'm selecting a data lake object as AWS S3 customers, I naturally cannot store the data in the same DLO. I need a new data lake object to store the transform data. In this case, all the other data lake objects are already filled or coming from an external system. Hence, I'm not going to choose any of them for output, which are not in here. So I'll click on cancel, go back and click on data lake object. Now, so far we have created a data lake object when creating a data stream for Salesforce, for AWS, where we created a connector, created a data stream, which created a data lake automatically. This time I'm going to click on new and I'm going to create a new data lake object from scratch. That means it doesn't have a source as data stream. It's not going to populate the data lake object from data stream. Instead, the source will be data transformation. I'm going to click on new. Next, give the name of data lake as email address list. It's very similar. I still have to go through all the steps, which is give the name, give the category, and provide the fields. It's just not related to a data stream at this point in time. I'm going to select profile because the data is related to a profile. I'm going to add 3 fields. One is email, which stores an email information. I can either choose text or email. They both have the same relevance. Email will definitely have some more validations naturally. Then I have party. I have to give text. Party is this is a custom DLO, hence we're going to name it party still, but the party will eventually map to an individual ID to store individual ID information and create the relationship between email address list and your AWS S3 customers. Or when we actually map it to DMOs, email address list will be mapped to contact point email. And the next field was email address key. Email address key. Now this is a text, but this is also a primary key. Hence, I'm going to select a primary key from here. And you can only select one. You cannot select multiple primary keys. You get these 4 fields by default: data source object, if there's an internal organization, and the source version. These are 4 standard fields that comes with every data lake within Data Cloud. We have created 3 more fields: email to store an email address, party to store the individual ID, and email address key is a primary key, which is a unique key for us. Click on save. And also add it to the data space. So if you see from a data mapping, it'll give you a warning that data lake object is not added to any data space, hence they cannot perform a mapping. So when we are creating a data lake from here, by clicking on a new button, we have to go to data spaces. There's a tab called data space within Data Cloud app. We only have one data space at this point in time. We can definitely create more, not from here, but from the setup. And this data space gives you an option to choose more data lakes, to perform filters if you haven't performed it for the first time, even to remove the data lake, a relevant data lake from a data space. I'll click on Add Data Lake Objects button, and it'll show me the list of all the data lakes which are not related to this data space at this point in time. I'm going to select email address list, click on Next. I'm not providing any filters, and that's the reason I have to check this acknowledgement. You're about to add one object to the data space default with no filters applied. Anyone with access with the data space can see the entire object, and that's why they need an acknowledgement to make sure we understand the consequences of adding a data lake into a data space. And if there are no filters, there's a possibility where the user will be able to see all the data within the data space, and we are aware of it. Now click on save, and now you have email address list in here. If I go back to the data lake email address, you'll see the name has changed where the concept has changed. The data mapping is ready to start. Previously, it wasn't because the data lake object wasn't related to a data space. So keep in mind, even when you're doing a configuration by yourself, if you're not able to see a data mapping, you'll get a clear indication that you have to go to data space, add this data lake to the data space, and then you can perform a mapping. Now we do have an input data lake object. We do have an output data lake object. Let's start the transformation process again. Now you see email address list. We're not going to select it yet because that's not an input. I'm going to select Amazon S3 customers. And I don't need a lot of fields from here. I definitely need customer primary email address. I don't need passport number, customer alternate email address. I do need customer ID because this is the primary key for this use case. I do need customer rewards number. I think I need only the 5 fields. I'll review it again. For transformation of email, I do need primary email address, customer ID, and customer alternate email address. These are 3 fields which I need for transforming, for transforming the identifier. I need passport number, I need customer ID, I need customer rewards number. I'll just uncheck them at this point in time because we have to create a new data transformation anyways. I'll click on next. Now here you have your input, you have your data source. Just in case, if you're wondering or if you have a question, can you add multiple data sources? The answer is yes. If I choose contact, cases, or anything else, click on next, I'll have a different data source. And you can perform transformation filters. You can join them at a different stage if you would like to. And if you want to delete a node, click on the 3 dots in here and delete the node from here. So you can have multiple inputs. You can perform the join transformation, and then you can push the data to an output. That's what data transformation does. I'll not be able to save any information at this point in time unless I have an output. So the aim for us to finish the data transformation from input to output as soon as possible so that we can save the data transform and make sure, even if it's in draft state, we have the information saved. Don't really wait to complete all of your transformation and then save the data transform. It can be risky. There are situations where you might close the tab accidentally, and you'll end up not having, you'll end up doing the work again. Now, from this input, AWS S3 customers, the first thing I want to do is create a filter. I only need the data for one of the email addresses at this point in time. Now, I'll go back to our Excel file. What I want to do is bring the data for primary email address first, then for alternate email address, make sure there are no empty records within the rows, and then perform a transformation on them, eventually joining them at a later stage. So the first thing which I'm doing is performing a filter. And this is the preview which you're going to get almost at every screen within the transformation. So you know what data you are modifying or you're updating. This is just a preview, so it will not have all the data. It'll have some data for yourself. Now, at this point in time, you're able to see all the data for primary and alternate email addresses. I'm going to add a custom expression where I want to review the character length of a field should be greater than 0. So this is a filter expression editor and a custom filter expression editor. I'm going to insert a character length formula. I'm going to go to columns and select primary email address. Let's say plus should be greater than 0. So the character length of the primary email address should be greater than 0. That's about it. Click on apply. You wouldn't notice a change because we have email addresses for primary email address, all the email addresses, but we will see this change when we go to alternate email address. You can click anywhere outside the box to hide this filter. I am also going to rename it primary email filter, apply. Now that makes it a lot more meaningful, and we'll be able to understand whether the thread is for primary email address or for secondary email address. Once you perform a filter, the next thing is to perform the actual transformation. And when I click on it, you will see a different screen. I'll change the name from here to primary email transform, apply. Now, there are a few things which we needed to do. First of all, we only need the primary email address at this point in time. We do need customer ID, and we do need a key to combine both the values and then go from there. So I'm going to drop this column, customer alternate email address. To drop the column, you select the column that you want to drop. And then at the top, if you if you look at the transformation stage, you have multiple different options. One of them is at the end, drop the columns. So I'm going to click on that and drop the column. Keep in mind there is no change in your source, or sorry, in your input source. So there will be no change. This column will still be there into your AWS S3 customers table. This is just a transformation staging review where whatever we are going to drop is going to be dropped only from the preview or only from, let's say, a transient database. I'll click on apply. And now you will see a preview where you only have two columns at this point in time, customer primary email address and customer ID. And you'll also get step-by-step process of what we did at what point in time within this transformation screen. So firstly, we drop the columns. The next thing we are going to do is change the labels for both the existing columns. So I'll select primary customer primary email address. And the second from the last is edit attributes. When you go to it, you'll hover, you will see edit attributes. When you click on it, I'm just going to change the label from primary email address to just email. I'm going to change the API name as well to email. Now, API name is very similar to Salesforce core API name, and you have to provide underscore C within the transformation table for the API name of the column. I'll click on apply. And here you see you have a history of what we did at what point in time. Firstly, we dropped the columns. Secondly, we edited the attributes to change the name or label from customer primary email address to just email. I'm going to repeat the same exercise. So I'm going to go to the customer ID, click on edit attributes and change this customer ID to actually party now, because this will become a foreign key. This is not a primary key for this particular data transformation and the output that we want to produce. Click on apply. And you have a preview again. Now it's looking much more cleaner and much more relatable to our email address list data lake object, where we needed email, we needed party, we also need email address key. So that's the next field we are going to create. This field is going to be a formula field because it's a combination of party and email address together. So I'm going to click on FX, which is the formula screen. I can either have a date time right here, right now, or I can create a custom formula. We are going to click on custom formula. And again, we have a preview in here. We want to concatenate the two columns. Hence, I'm going to search for concat. Click on plus. When you click on plus, it adds everything. There's one thing to note when you're going to do hands-on, you'll find it a bit frustrating. But if you just select the formula, come to columns and click on plus again, it will override, because when you click on plus, it selects everything by default. So the trick is go to functions, click on plus, bring your cursor here, click on the field, click on the go to columns, click on the field that you want to insert, and it will override the information in here. So I'm going to choose party and email as a concatenation. Now this will create our unique key for email address list. I'm going to scroll down and fill other relevant information such as output is text. There's no default value. Length, I'm going to get 255. And the label is email address key. And the API name is again email underscore address underscore key double underscore C. As I click on apply, it's going to add another column, and now we have our data set ready, at least for the primary key. This is what we wanted. If I go back to our Excel file, in transformation, we needed a unique key, which is an email address key for us. We needed customer ID, which is party, to create the relationship between this data set with AWS S3 customers. Also, we needed email address in a single column. We didn't really need two columns, primary and secondary. Hence, this output is looking very close to where we want to be. I'll click on the collapse icon and click anywhere on the canvas to get rid of that view. If you want to see it again, click on it and you'll be able to come back here. You can scroll this up and down. You can also expand the view if you would like to. There are many other things that we can do. I am going to share a few more, such as changing the data type of any of the columns and etc. Hiding a column. There are a lot of things which we can do in here. The last thing that I'm going to do as part of this exercise for primary email filter is put this information, put the transformation into an output. So you have an input, we perform the filter, we perform the transformation. Now it's time to store this transformation in an output. So I'm going to select an output. In here, I'm going to select the data lake object. If you look, it only will let you select data lake object. This right to is not editable because if we select an input as DLO, we have to select an output as DLO. If we select an input as DMO, we have to select an output as DMO. What comes in is what goes out within the transformation. I've selected email address list here. Because the field values are same, the mapping has been done automatically where your email from transformation to email address list is being stored in email, party in party, email address list, email address key is an email address key. For instance, if your batch data transform field values were different, you'll just have to search for the columns in here and select the column by yourself. Click on apply. And now you have an output ready with yourself. I'll just change the output to email address list. Apply. Now, at this stage, the data hasn't gone through. The batch data transform is not saved yet. So I'm going to go ahead and click on save, select the name, email address transform, let's say AWS email address transform. Click on save. Now your data transformation is saved. So even if we close the window, we will have reference to it. Now we have to repeat the same exercise, but for secondary email address. So I'm going to go back to AWS S3 customers input, and now you can see that there is a branching option. So I can add a new branch from here if I want to. So I'm going to create a new branch. The filter will be secondary email filter, apply. It's the same steps, but this time the focus will be alternate email or the secondary email. And click on add custom expression. We looked at character length previously. A character length for alternate email address has to be greater than 0. Now, as soon as we apply the filter, you'll notice the two rows will drop off, Bob Brown and Adam Smith. Click on apply and wait for the preview. And this is going to be consistent. So the data that we look into transformation will actually be a filtered data. So here we have removed the two rows which didn't really had any alternate email address at all. Going to click on plus, again, do the transformation for secondary email address. secondary email transform. The transformation is similar, where we are going to drop the column which we do not need, first of all. In this case, primary custom email address, which we do not need. We already have that information. I'll click on drop columns, click on apply. Secondly, we are going to go ahead and update the labels and the API names for each of these columns. So I'm going to click on edit attributes, change the label to email, and change the API name as well to email underscore C. Click on apply. Same thing with customer ID. I don't have to wait for the preview. I can just go ahead and edit the attributes as well. So it's not a dependency. I just want to do it step by step so you can see the data as well as the change values within this transformation. So click on here and choose party and party double underscore C. Click on apply. And the last thing is adding a formula, adding a formula to bring in a unique key for party and email together. Click on custom field, select one cat. Hover over the field or select the field value to party, and then the next one, email. And scroll down, similar thing, I'm going to choose the output as text. There's no default value. The length is 255. The column label is email address key. And the API name is also email underscore address underscore key double underscore C. Click on apply. Now we'll have three columns, exactly the columns that we needed for this transformation for the output. You have email, party, and email address key. And at this point in time, we have done perform transformation for secondary email or alternate email as well. If I want, I can save this at any point in time. The data cloud transformation only needs one node to go from source to target, from input to output. After that, you can save drafts in every go. Now, I want to make sure that both of these transformations are stored in a single output. I do not really want two different outputs. I do not really want to override the data. Hence, I'm going to utilize append functionality. Now, I'm going to click on plus, and I'm going to try to join it in here. Again, I'll repeat it again. I'll click on plus, and I'll drag this one to primary email address. It'll give me three options: join, append, and update. For my case, I have to append it. When I'm appending, it'll again make sure the batch data transform and the secondary email address are matching with each other. And if you see, the output is holistic now, where I have both the emails, the primary and the secondary. I have the party information from both primary and secondary, and also the email address key will be unique because of the combination of party and the email ID. As I click on apply, that's about it. The output that will be stored into email address list will be this. So this is a preview of what we're going to get. Your holistic emails, primary and secondary, party ID, and email address key. All right, I'm going to click on save. I'll click on back to data transforms, which will take me to the Salesforce record page for data transformation or the related list. Now I have one data transformation, AWS email address transform. The data hasn't moved yet. The data is not, if you see, there are no total records with an email address list yet because we have just created the data transformation. We have to run the data transformation as well. So I'm going to click on data transformation. Now at this point in time, you can see the details of the transformation. There are no expressions available at this point in time. Expression is usually available when it's in SQL. When we are performing insights, you'll see that whatever we do within insights or within streaming data transformation, which is mainly driven by SQL, you will see an expression, SQL expression set in here for preview. And there's certainly no refresh history. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Run Now. You can also schedule it. We are not going to do that for this activity, but you can schedule a data transformation to either run on a manual mode, which is where we are right now, or you can schedule it every 6 hours, every day, at a particular time on certain days. So there's flexibility in here if you want to schedule the data transform as well. For our exercise, I'm just going to click on Run Now, and your data transformation has started running. Very similar, if you want to review the last run status, just click on Update Status. It doesn't have an icon to refresh the status at this point in time, like data streams, and it's in progress. So we'll come back here. You'll see the last run status is in progress. We'll not wait for it to complete. We'll just jump into the next data transformation, which is for identity, contact identifier, or party identification in our use case. Now I'll go back to the previous hands-on where we needed to create a new data lake object to store multiple identifiers for customer as identifier list. The fields will be party, identifier type, identifier name, identifier number, and identifier key. So we're going to have 5 fields within this DLO. And then we'll go ahead and perform the transformation. So I'll go back to the data lake objects first. I'll follow the same approach where I'll click on new, choose create from scratch, the data lake object. I'm going to create a new data transformation for identifier list. The category again will be profile because it is storing an information about the customer. What step are we doing? So we needed to perform 2 transformations, Rasa. One was for email. If I go back in here, one was for contact point email, which we have successfully done to store the email addresses in a different data lake, in a different data lake object with the format that we needed, which is a unique key, the party, and the email address. We have to perform the same transformation for the identifier. Salesforce Data Cloud needs party identification in a very specific format. The format is actually mentioned in here where you have identifier type, identifier name, identifier number, party, and identification ID. The data that we received, it only has 2 things, or 3 things, I would say: party, the identification types in here, but it doesn't really have columns like type and number and etc. So I'm going to go ahead and perform a transformation where we bring all the numbers together, all the identifier numbers. The numbers will have a type, either it's a customer rewards number or a passport number. Um, Data Cloud needs identifier name. I'm going to just call it the identifier name as identifier for all of them. But usually you'll have a different name, such as this is just a customer rewards number and passport number, or identity information, or personal identity information. Your customer ID will become a party because this will become a lookup relationship. And finally, the unique key is combination of customer ID and the identifier. So that's the second transformation which we are doing to ingest the data for identifiers, party identification. Right, I'm going to click on add field 5 times. I need identifier key. It's a text. This will store the primary key. So I'm selected this as primary key. I do need identifier name. This is a text as well. The next I'm going to select is identifier number. Going to keep it as a number field. Next I'm going to select is Just 1 second. I need to make sure that I'm selecting the right data type in here. Identifier number, _C. I'll just go to data model object, make sure that I'm selecting the right data type. When we go to the mapping exercise, we'll realize the data type is equally important. If we don't select the right data type, we'll not be able to perform data mapping. Party identification. Identifier number is a text field. Okay. I'll explain this step as well, why I went in here and why did I do the step which I have done right now. But it's to make sure the source and target field data types are same. That's the way, that's the easiest way, or that's the best way to map the data. Otherwise, we'll not be able to map the data. You have identifier type, and so you have identifier key, name, number, type, and what was the last one? Party. And this is also a text. This is a foreign key. I'll click on save. Our data lake object is ready, which is identifier key, name, number, type, and party. I'm going to add it to the data space as well. Similar to what we have done for email address list, go to the default data space, click on add data lake objects, select identifier list, click on next. It'll ask you to acknowledge because we have no filters, and it just wants to make sure we know the consequences of bringing a new data lake object, which is exposing the data to all the users who are part of that data space. Go back to data lake object, make sure the identifier list has data mapping, and now go back to the data transformation. Data transform. Okay, if you look, AWS email address transform is successful. We are going to look at it, and it doesn't shows us how many records it has processed in here. So 24 records being processed in here. Once we complete our data transformation, we'll go back and have a look at the data as well that is stored into data lake object. So I'll go back to data transform, but our previous data transformation was successful. The batch ran, it transformed the data, it has stored the data into our provided data lake object. I'll click on new, and this time you're going to do a transformation for identifier list. Again, it's a batch data transform because we are getting the data from AWS S3. You are going to select data lake object in this case as well. And add an input. The input will be same, AWS S3 customers. The difference is we are going to select customer ID, customer rewards number, and passport number this time. Only 3 columns. Click on next. We're going to perform similar exercise where we want to make sure there's nothing extra that's coming in. In this case, we do not have to perform a filter. If you want to, you can, but we do not have to perform a filter as the data is available in both the columns. I'll still do it from a scalability point of view to emphasize on scalability. We are not going to get any more data which doesn't have customer primary rewards number or a passport number. But if it comes to that point, I just want to make sure that we are following the best practices and transformation. So I'm going to apply the filter. Once again, this time I'm first of all going with passport, filter, apply, add custom expression. I'm going to select character length. For your passport number has to be greater than 0. Click on apply. These filters naturally will not have any impact on the data because you do not have any blanks. But think of it in a way that we are performing data transform not only for this data set, but for any other data set that we can expect in future. And if we can expect blank values in any of the columns, it's a good idea to filter them before going ahead and processing them in the next step. Now, the next thing is to perform a transformation on the filtered data. Transport, transform. All right, again, the first thing we're going to do is drop the customer rewards number because we are not doing anything with customer rewards number in here. I'm going to drop the column, click on apply. Now I have customer ID, which is actually a party. I have passport number, which is your transformation number. I did needed three more fields. One of them was a combination of these two. Other was type, and the next was identifier name. So before renaming them, I'm going to go ahead and add those new columns. The first column I'm going to add is a custom formula, and that's going to be a static formula. It's going to be your passport NR, passport number. That's the reason why I haven't renamed it yet. I just want to make sure that I'm providing identifier type as passport number for these values. Click on text. Excuse me. I'm going to select identifier type. In here, click on apply. I don't remove this part. Apply. And this is a static value, but only for passport number. So now you have identifier type and you have passport number. So it will be able to help you relate these values are for what. Is it for a passport number or is it for customer rewards number? Now at this point, I can go back and I can change the attribute names to more relatable attribute names, which is identifier number for this one. Click on apply. And then for customer ID, we are going to change it to party. So we already have three columns that we wanted for this data transform. We need two more, and the remaining two are static. One of them is static, and another is a formula field. So I'm going to rename customer ID as well to party and apply. All right, now we have party, identifier number, identifier type. We need identifier name and identifier key. Going to add a custom formula. And I only need, again, I just need identifier as a static value for identifier name. So I'm going to go ahead and put identifier in the formula box. I'm going to choose output as text. Keep it 40. We are not going to exceed it 40 at this point in time, and provide identifier name as the label and identifier underscore name and underscore C as the API name. Click on apply. Now we should have four columns: party, identifier number, identifier type, identifier name. The last we need is the identifier key for primary key. The last we want is primary key. For that, we need to perform a concatenation. So you have a concatenate on party and then on the identifier number, which makes the unique combination for these for this record. Going to select text, the length will be 255. The column will be identifier key, identifier underscore key double underscore C will be the API name. Click on apply. Now you have 5 columns, and this is the output which we needed. You have party, identifier number, identifier type, name, and identifier key. At this point in time, before going forward, I just want to make a quick check that we have the fields that we need, which is party, identifier type, name, number, and identifier key. Once we are comfortable, we'll collapse this one and we'll add an output. Now this time we're just going to store the data into a data lake object again. The name of the data lake object will be identifier list. If you're not able to find it in here because there's no scroll, you just have to search for it and you'll find the data lake that you're looking for. Again, the mapping is done because the values for the field, the API name and the label are the same. If they are not the same, we are just going to search for the, we are going to search for the field value with an identifier list, and we have to put it the field name. So I'm going to search for party and I'm going to map it. So it's a mapping automatically done, but we can do it ourselves as well. Finally, click on apply. Now we have completed a circle from input to output. At this point in time, I'm going to click on save and give it a name as identifier transform. Click on save. So we have completed it for passport. Now the next exercise is to do the same for customer rewards number. So again, the filter. Rewards filter. Apply. I'm going to add a custom expression to make sure the character length for customer rewards number is greater than 0. Customer rewards number is greater than 0. Click on apply. Again, this will have no change because both the customer rewards number and passport number have values, at least in the data set that we are working right now. The next step is to perform similar transformation. What we did for passport, we are going to do the same for customer rewards number as well. So this time I'm going to drop passport number because that's not something which I need at this point in time. I'll drop the column. So now I have 2 columns, customer ID and customer rewards number. I'm going to add another column as identifier type, and I'll keep the value static as customer reward number. Scroll down, I'll select the text output as text. The length 40 is all right. And I'm going to select identifier type as a custom label and identifier underscore type double underscore C as the API name. Now click on apply. Now we should have 3 columns, and by this time we are ready to go ahead and update the column values. My apologies, column labels in here. So now we have identifier type customer rewards number in here. I'm going to edit the attributes to identifier number. Apply. There's one more transformation which I'm going to do, which is I'm going to change this from number to text because our data lake is identifier number is text. Also, the party identification data model object is text. So you can click here and change it from number to text, email, phone, etc. So you can also change the data type within the transformation screen. It makes sure that we understand the output type is text and the length is 255. Click on apply. And that's an additional step which we have taken in this transformation, that is changing the data type. And if you notice, the 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 options has also changed above. Previously, the options were limited. Now there are a bit more options for the text type of data type. Now I'm going to change the customer ID to party. And for the other two fields, there's no change. It's very similar, where we are going to apply a static formula and then a formula to can concatenate party and the identification number. So I'm going to go to custom formula and identifier is a static value for identifier name. Select output as text, length 40 is all right. And identifier name, click on apply. Now you have 4 columns: party, identifier type, identifier number, and identifier name. The last we need is identifier key. Going to add a custom formula. This time we're going to concatenate. So concatenate, first field will be your party. The second field will be your identifier number. That makes it unique for each of the rows. Output is text. I'll change the length to 255. And finally, the label is identifier key. And the API name is identifier underscore key underscore C. Now, this is the output that we were expecting. The 5 columns for us. The API name for the party should be party. Is it not? I'll have a look. Just a second. In here, I'll click on edit attributes again. All right. The underscore C. And thank you for that. Number, party, formula. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. This is what we were expecting as an output. Your identifier type to determine what's the customer rewards number, your identifier number, which is coming from source. It's being transformed to text from number, your identifier name, which is a static value, your identifier key, which is a combination of customer ID and your identifier number, and finally a foreign key party to create the relationship between this data model, data lake, and the data lake for customer AWS customers. Now I'll collapse it and I'll save the draft. Now again, similar to previous, I'm going to make sure that both the transformations are being merged. And for that, click on plus, drop it to passport transform, choose append as an option, keep editing, and the mapping is done correctly. And now if you notice, we have received the output that we needed, which is combination of passport and customer rewards number. We do have identifier number in one column, and we do have identifier type informing us what kind of identifier it is. Is it a passport or a customer reward number? And this is what we were expecting to store in the data lake object that we created. Also in the Excel sheet that we have worked upon, this is the expected outcome we were looking for. So before you actually go ahead and start doing a data transform, it's a good exercise to look and try to identify what we need to do upfront, and then go in and perform the hands-on within Data Cloud. I'm going to rename is merge identifiers, and your output will be identifier list, apply, save, and the next exercise is to go in and run this data transform as well. So click on run now. excuse me, and click on update status. So now it should be in progress and we should be able to look at the outcome once it's completed. For now, let's have a look at the data lake object that we created previously. I'll go back to email address list. And you'll notice there are about 24 records in email address list. I'll go back to Data Explorer and go to Data Lake Object. Search for email address list to visualize the data. Now, let me remove the columns that we do not need, which is internal organization, key qualifier. I'll keep data source and data source object. There's a relevance for that, and I'll explain what it is. But once I click on done, you can see there are 24 records. You have email address key as the primary key, the email address, and the foreign relationship, which is party. But also notice that you have your data source as data source transform. In the previous examples, we have seen our data source is either Salesforce CRM or AWS, because that's where the data is coming from. That's the data stream from where the data is coming from. Versus in this case, our data source is data transform. So the data is not coming from AWS or from Salesforce. It's actually being transformed within Data Cloud. And you'll also be able to see the AWS source. So source is AWS email address transform. That's the name of the transformation that we have. So from here, you can realize that this is a transform data based on the data source. And what is the name of the transformation? That's something you can see from the data source object. If I try to change the view and go to AWS S3 customers, for instance, and if you look at the data source, the data source is AWS S3, the name that we kept during the data streaming process. And the data source object is actually, it's the file name from where the file is coming. So your S3, your bucket name, and then your CSV file name. So at any point in time, you'll be able to realize where this data has come from which source, and from which file, or from which object. If I try to give an example of Salesforce as well, so when I select contact, I do have to remove a few columns and bring in data source and data source object. Now here you'll see the data source is Salesforce Home because that's the name of our connector. And your data source object is contact. So again, you know which source and like which connector and which source object the data is coming from. So that's different from for the data streams that we have created. It heavily relies on the source object or the file or the name, versus for transformation, it relies on what the name of the transformation was at that point in time. Right, the identifier transformation is successful as well. If I go back and look at the identifier list, you'll notice that there are 26 records. The reason there's a difference between the records of email and identifier is for those two records which did not had alternate email address. And that's the reason why there are only 24 records, not 26. If I go back to Data Explorer and select Data Lake Object, this time select Identifier List. And if I remove unnecessary columns, which is these, and bring the sources down, click on done. So you have identifier key, the identifier name, which is static identifier, the identifier number, type, party, and finally the data source, which is Data Cloud Transform, and your source object, which is AWS Identifier Transform, the name of the transformation. And with this, we have completed our hands-on exercise of, first of all, creating a new data lake object, performing transformations to store information into data lake object for both for email address as well as identifier key. And so we completed this exercise. The next thing we are going to do is continue with the data modeling. We have to perform a hands-on to map the data models of AWS and customers, Salesforce CRM contacts, and then learn a bit more about customer 360 data model, standard versus custom data models, hands-on exercise for AWS, data modeling best practices, and that's about it. Now, just to revise, there are two hands-on in this exercise. One is for Salesforce, we need to map the data lake objects with data model objects that for data that's come from Salesforce. And we are going to do the second exercise for AWS as well. But before that, let's complete the theory part. Now, we discussed about Salesforce Customer 360 data model. We discussed about there are hundreds of standard data model objects available in Salesforce. They are divided into subject areas. We looked at one subject area, which was party subject area, which stores the information about the individual, its related contact points, and the party identification. There are many more subject areas, such as, and these are not all, there are a lot more than this, such as financial sector, your healthcare sector, consumer goods, etc., public sector. These are a few examples, such as engagement subject area. You have standard data model objects, such as email engagement, you have product browse engagement, shopping cart, website engagement, etc. and etc. So you don't have to create and think of fields by yourself. Salesforce has done the work where you have a standard data model objects, you have standard fields available. If you want, you can create more fields on top of it, but you have the starting point, and subject area is usually divided for those starting points to bring multiple DMOs under one umbrella. Similarly, you have sales order subject area, such as your sales orders, sales order product, your sales store, order delivery method, product subject area. To support your sales order, you might need a goods product, your master product, or your product catalog. Privacy subject area, such as your party consent, your contact point consent, communication subscription consent, etc. And your loyalty subject area, such as loyalty program member, loyalty tier, program voucher, currencies, promotions, etc. So subject area is, think of it as a logical umbrella, which brings multiple data model objects for the same purpose together within a single umbrella. Now, there is a way to go ahead and identify what you're going to map against your data lake object. We usually rely on Salesforce standard documentation, the same documentation that I mentioned before. You have a lot of DMOs available in here, your standard data model objects. The aim is to understand if there's any data model object that you're trying to map to is already available. If it is, does it fits your criteria? Does it fits your business needs? If it does, bring it into your documentation and start building your documentation accordingly. To emphasize, for our use case, we know that we have contact information, we have case information, we have parking spot, parking reservation information, and contact identifier, most importantly. So I'm going to search here whether there's something called contact. I do find account contact, contact point email. There is a lot of contact, but that's not exactly what I'm looking for. But then I land here where I see individual DMO is a data cloud data model for objects, data model object for contacts, customers, or other people interested in your company, products, and services. Now, this description fits really well to what I'm looking for. Hence, I click on this individual DMO and try to look around what it's about. So categories profile, again, which makes sense that we are in the right track. Your subject area is contact. Skipping the relationships, if I go to fields, I'll be able to realize it's at birth date, it has children account, it has the name, and other information, which is usually stored for a contact. I don't have so much to store, but I do have a few information such as first name, last name, the mailing name, birth date, etc. So I made a decision to bring individual into the mapping. Also, if we learn more about data cloud, individual and contact point becomes important or becomes mandatory for us to map to perform a unification. So individual object is quite important within data cloud. The next I'm going to look at if I cannot store email within an individual. So if I search for it, you have relationships to contact point email, but you can't really store email with an individual. That's how I go about and try to understand what contact point email is, what contact point phone is, etc. Again, I'm trying to fast track this conversation, but it can be an important and a lengthy exercise for you. It's not easy to find what you're looking for in the bunch of 100 records, but there are documentations which can help you understand what do you need for, let's say, for loyalty management within Data Cloud? What do you need for financial services within Data Cloud? What standard data model objects do you have available? And that's how you go about and try to make a decision whether you want to go with a standard data model object or you want to go with a custom data model object. Now that becomes your choice at that point in time. For individual contact points, you do not have a choice. You have to go with individual or contact point and party identification if you want to perform a unification. Similarly, I'm going to search for parking. I don't find anything like parking. I'm going to search for space. I cannot find anything like space. That means I can go ahead and create a custom data model. I do not have any stated standard data model for either parking reservation or a parking space. If I search for case, I do have a case DMO. It says a case DMO in data cloud data model object for support cases based on recorded issues. Now, this can be a case from a sales or service cloud. This can be a case from an external system such as Zendesk or any other service desk as well. What is the difference between the relationship of Salesforce core objects versus data cloud objects? Does a concept like master detail relationships apply to data cloud DMOs? Rasa, they are similar because they both are relational database management systems. They both store foreign keys and lookup relationships. Versus from a Salesforce core point of view, it does gives us a very good overview of the data. For instance, if I go back to Salesforce has done and invested a lot of energy and time in creating CRM. So if I go to, let's say, contact identifier, for instance, and if I go to any of the record, you can clearly see that there's a relationship to a contact and you can see the name, not the ID. ID is what is binding it behind the scenes, but in this view, all you see is the ID. And if I click on it, you'll be able to go to a next step. Now, this is all user interface. If you look at the data, if you try to export the data in using data loader in an Excel file, you'll realize it's all IDs behind the scenes. So Salesforce is also storing the lookup or the master detail relationship in a text format, but then it has a layer of user interface where it can surface the data much more appropriately. Also, the lookup and master detail is basically, is it a mandatory field or a non-mandatory field? And based on that, you have consequences for master details, such as you can or you cannot delete the child records, you need to map it to another parent, and etc. With Data Cloud, it's not as such. From a concept, it's similar, where if I go to, let's say, contact point, no, we are not there yet. If I go to email address list, you'll realize that you have a party identification in here, customer 008. But this is again a text field. This is a foreign key. There's no concept of lookup or master detail in Data Cloud, but it definitely tries to create the relationships using the interface when we come to that stage. So in data model, when we have created a data model, you'll be able to see the relationships, yes, but it doesn't work exactly same as Data Cloud, as Salesforce CRM. It doesn't have a differentiation of lookup and master detail relationship. It for sure doesn't have the user interface that Salesforce CRM does. So they are common, at least in terms of relationship data, relational database management system, but they are not common from the user interface point of view. And specific nitty-gritty such as lookup and master detail relationship is not relevant for Data Cloud. Now, what's the difference between standard and custom data model objects? So you have standard data model objects, which we have seen. We can create custom data model objects, which we are going to do as part of the exercise. It's very similar between a standard Salesforce object and a custom object. Standard object comes with a CRM. It comes with a package, either sales, service, financial services, public sector. It always has a business context. Versus your custom data model, you try to extend Salesforce CRM on top of what you already have. And that's really the major difference between standard and a custom object. Now, why should you use a standard data model object versus why should you use the custom data model object? Now, some standard objects are required for data cloud identity resolution. As I mentioned, individual contact points, party identification is mandatory for you to map. If you create your own custom, let's say contact or individual data model object, your identity resolutions will not work. When you go to the configuration, you'll face challenges and you'll not be able to perform the unification, which is also called identity resolution in Data Cloud. Align with Salesforce opinionated data model. Salesforce has invested a lot into standard data models, hence they want you to leverage it and reduce your or increase your time to market. So you can go to market quickly rather than really rediscovering what's already been there. Speed time to value by relying on pre-built object relationship. Again, they align with each other, the second and the third points, and grow your data cloud implementation with App Exchange offerings built on standard objects. So think of App Exchange offerings which are solely focused on Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, public sector, financial services, loyalty management, you name it. There are a lot of App Exchange packages and partners who have already provided their App Exchange apps to expedite your implementation for Data Cloud. And partners usually rely on standard data model. They do bring their own custom DMOs if there's a need, but they mostly rely on standard data model. If you go with custom data models, our chances of using App Exchange will be very limited. Versus when or why should you use a custom data model, especially if you have an established in-house data model. Your client or your company is pretty mature. They have a very well-groomed data model that's been working across multiple systems. You already have a data warehouse or data lake. We have invested a lot of time. There's no point, again, for you to invest a lot and understand about data cloud standard data model. You might be able to bring in your data model by yourself into Data Cloud and use it, discard majority of the standard data model from Data Cloud. Again, there will still be a limitation. You'll still be required to follow and map certain standard data models, such as individual contact points, etc. Allow your marketers and data consultants to interact with familiar model. Again, if you have an established data model, that means it's commonly known between marketers and data consultants within the organization. You do not want them to go through the learning path again, hence bring the custom data model. It matches existing data structures for easier integrations. If you have integrations already defined, again, you do not have to work on a lot on the mappings and etc. When bringing the data model, it has a benefit of bringing the mappings as well from an external system into your ingestion APIs, even for that matter, into your data streams. Implementation provides the ability to create custom objects, fields, and relationship. If there's a need, we can always create a custom object. For our case, we are going to create it for parking spaces and parking reservations for sure, because there's no standard data model. So sometimes there's not an option. You just have to go in and create a custom data model for yourself. Let's review data modeling best practices. Create an offline data dictionary or inventory for each source system in a spreadsheet. I think I have shown a few of you before. Let me bring this back. We have a data dictionary, a simulated data dictionary in Data Cloud ourselves. If I open this one, I did presented it in one of the previous sessions where we talked about the use cases and ingestion. Now you have defined use cases in here. What are the different use cases that you want to achieve? You have setup. So you define your user, you define your sales cloud, your different sources from where the data is coming from, which objects the data is coming from, what's the type, and etc. You define the data streams, the data mapping, what are the different events, or I would say the frequency you are going to bring the data, primary key, your event ID, any other information goes into data streams. Then your data transformation, your AWS S3 customer information will go to which identifier list versus email address list. So there is, if we do a lot of, sorry, where are we? Data transform. I'm clicking on the wrong plus. If we do a lot of prep work outside of Data Cloud, the configuration becomes easier and there are less chances. So transformation, then you have data mappings from where the data is coming, such as your data source. This is mainly between your DLOs to DMOs. We can also think of it as Salesforce data to DLOs to DMOs. They can be three-level mappings in here, but this is quite important for us to understand what are we mapping to from Salesforce or data lake objects to data model objects. Also, what's the relationship? Is it n is to 1? Where is the relationship going at? Now this can grow further and further, not just for one, but for all the data models that we have created so far. And this will help us understand whether it's going to be a standard data model object or a custom data model object. So the example I was giving where you have to go in, find the data model object, this is where you're going to put in a lot of information. This is where you're going to create your data dictionary. Once you have created your data dictionary, your configuration becomes much more easier. Is it same as a Google Sheet document? So the Google Sheet document was actually just the data, Rasab. This is the data dictionary. So you'll not be able to see the data such as first name as Neeraj, but you'll be able to see the configuration. So this is a data dictionary where you define your use cases, you define where the data is coming from, your attribute level information, your data streams, mapping, transformation. Even if you go far to the next, you'll also be able to see segmentation and other options. So this is think of it like your configuration workbook. So having an offline data dictionary makes absolute difference. Like I can't emphasize on that more, how much you have to work outside of Data Cloud to make Data Cloud projects successful. Identify field level data, its accuracy and the data model object and the fields that it's going to be mapped to. That's important because that'll define whether do you need a transformation or not. Which fields are you going to map it to? Do you need a standard data model object, standard field, standard data model object, custom field, etc. Consider how each data source and corresponding field relates to an individual object. For example, if you're bringing a web engagement data, ensure it's mapped to the individual DMO or an attribute that is mapped to individual DMO. It's trying to say is, what it's trying to say is when you're trying to bring the data source, make sure it relates to individual in some or the other way, such as when we bring the product information, we also bring the sales order and sales order line information, and we bring the individual information or the customer information. Now, product is indirectly related to customer, where customer has purchased a sales order has a sales order line item has a relationship to product. So whatever you're bringing into Data Cloud, make sure it has a relationship to individual. At the end of the day, All we are trying to do is create a unified profile, create a customer 360 for our contacts, for our customers, for our parties. And for doing that, it's important to bring the data that's relevant. If you have brought the data which is not serving any purpose, which is not relating to individual at all, you're not going to get the return of investment. In fact, the data will just reside in Data Cloud. We're not going to do anything about it. Consider the downstream use cases of mapping, such as once you have done a mapping, what are you going to do with the segmentation? And that's why it's important to think from the use case perspective. The data that you're bringing should serve your purpose at the end, should be able to help you identify or segment the individuals when it comes to it. Establish how the source data must be transformed and mapped into standard data model. Not all source systems provide normalized export options or normalized data for the same degree. That's exactly what we have done. During the ingestion phase, we realized the need for data transformation. The data was not normalized, hence we went ahead and performed the normalization. All of these things needs to be considered before we actually map the data. The last thing we want to do is map it and then realize it wasn't the correct mapping, or realize that it's overriding the data for any reason. Visualize objects in relationship holistically within the graph view on the data model tab. In many cases, it's better to inspect the relationship or lack of holistically mapping all the objects. When we have performed our hands-on exercise, I'm going to show you how you can view a graphical format of these relationships, and that can help a lot in terms of understanding what object is related to which data model within Salesforce Data Cloud. So you have ways of representing the relationships as well within Data Cloud. We're going to do that once we go to the hands-on phase. Your end-to-end sequence, you do have data sources. It can be a database, it can be an Excel, it can be an external system. And you can have multiple objects, such as we have 4 or 5 data streams. We create multiple data streams based on those data sources. The data streams create data lake objects. Then we perform a mapping. In between, if you need, you can also have data transformation, which we did for our use case. And then the mapping is eventually to the standard data models or the custom data models. So your multiple data sources are being mapped to a fewer data models. It can be standard, it can be custom. And again, the data models can be related to each other as well in many to many, in many to one or one-to-one relationships. All right, let's go back to the hands-on exercise. Let's start from here. Hands-on exercise for Salesforce CRM. We have to review the data lake object to data model object mapping for contact. Make sure the contact object, your mobile number, is mapped to formatted E164 phone number. Now, why it's saying review? It's because we already get a mapping when we use data bundles. I'll go back to Data Cloud and start with a hands-on exercise. Now, performing a mapping, you can either go to data stream or data lake. It will take you to the same mapping. We are mapping data lake objects to data model objects now. Now, before even we go to mapping, we know at this point in time that contacts from Salesforce will be mapped to Identifier. Sorry, not Identifier, your individual object, individual standard data model object. It will also map to your contact point email, contact point phone, because we store the email and phone at different places. So if I go to data model first, this is your data model object. It will have mapped as one of the list views and then another list view as all. So what we have seen from outside, you can also do the same research from inside. You have so more than 100 standard data model objects for various industries. And you can go in and search for a specific individual. So individual DMO, you'll be able to find it in here. Specifically for individual DMO, you can also find it in mapped because it's mapped automatically when we utilize the the data bundle. But it's important to understand where we are mapping to before we start the mapping. So I'll go to data lake object now. In here, I'm going to search for contact. So this is your contact home. I have about 41 records and 58 fields. I'll click on contact home. And if you realize it's the mapping is already done. And that's a benefit of using data bundle where you don't have to configure the stream. You can bring multiple objects at a point in time from Salesforce core or any external platform. You will get the data mapping. You can in fact get a lot more done in Data Cloud much more quickly, utilize where other people have invested their time in creating these mappings, transformations, identity resolution. Each and everything in Data Cloud can be packaged and sent to another instance as a manager unmanaged package. I'm going to click on review. So this will take me to the mapping page where I have data lake object on in left, data model object in the right. One data lake object can be mapped to multiple data model objects. So in this case, the contact, where I have a lot of fields, is actually mapped to account and contact. This is a standard mapping. We haven't done anything about it. We are not going to do anything about account contact in our hands-on. Our hands-on is very focused on B2C scenario, on just a customer scenario, not on the B2B or an account contact relationship scenario. So when you're doing your hands-on, you will see this as well. You can ignore this or you can delete this. There is no impact with account and contact relationship in our hands-on exercise. But that's one thing which is automatically mapped as part of your data bundle. Then you have contact point address, where there is an automated mapping or a mapping that's already done using a data bundle from your contact to contact point address. Then to contact point email, contact point phone, and individual. And that's the end of it. So we have mapped 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 data model objects out of one data lake object. And that's possible many a times. You can map one field to multiple fields within same or different data model objects. That's possible. Coming back to the mapping, I'm going to delete the mapping for contact point address as well. You can't delete contact point address because it has dependencies. Oh, it's related to a flow. Okay. I'll leave it as is right now. We don't want to go into the complexities of that. Now, we don't need to create a mapping. We need to review the mapping because the mapping is already done for us. What I need to make sure is the fields that we needed to map are there: first name, last name, salutation, record ID, email address. These are the only 5 fields we wanted to bring. The good thing about Data Cloud mapping is if you search for, let's say, first name, it will drill down everything just to that name, and it will make sure that you are able to see the exact mapping. So it just doesn't drills. It reduces the noise. If you notice, if I remove this again, there are a lot of mappings, and not all the mappings are relevant for us, at least for this use case, and not all the mappings will be relevant to you. So we just can put in the first name as a filter. It drills down only to that particular field in the source, and it tells you where it is being mapped. It's mapped correctly to individual, and that's all I needed to know. You can do the same vice versa. You can search for first name in here in data model. First name in here, and it'll try to find first name everywhere. It'll be able to find only an individual, and you can see the first name is mapped to first name. So it's the same thing. There are different ways of doing it, but it does helps you validate whether you have done the right mapping or not. The second thing we want to do is last name. The last name is mapped to last name in here, just perfectly fine. Then your contact ID. Your contact ID is mapped to quite a few things, such as your contact point address, contact point email, party of the contact point email, party of the contact point address, your contact point phone, and finally the individual. So your ID is being spread out to a few, or is being mapped to a few different fields within different data model objects, but that all seems about right. Then we have email, making sure the email field, at least the email field is mapped. The other fields are all right. Like I don't really need email bounce reason or bounce reason, but that's okay. It's coming. I'm not going to remove the mapping at this point in time. Salutation is being mapped to salutation with an individual. It's correct. And finally, the business phone. The business phone is mapped to a telephone number, and that's exactly where I'm able to see the warning as well. If you notice, the warning is not for any other DMO. It's only for this particular DMO. When I click on it, it'll show me the warning, which is the following attributes should be mapped to successfully use identity resolution, segmentation, and activation. So I need to make sure formatted E164 phone number field in DMO is mapped to the source. So to remove this mapping, I'm going to search for formatted E164 phone number, which is in here, contact point phone. I want to map it to business phone. I'm going to search for business phone. Click on the business phone. I'm not dragging and dropping, I'm just clicking. And take your cursor to where you want to map it to and click again. This will create a mapping for you from source to target. And if I have a review again in here, contact point address, that's okay. Contact point email, there's no warning for phone, no warning for individual. So we have reviewed the mapping, which we wanted to review from the source, 5 or 6 fields. We have validated they all are being mapped correctly. We have removed any warnings that are there. And now I'm going to click on save. I can also click on save and close. Save and close essentially will take me back to the previous screen where I came from. This is one view, and this is the view which I prefer. There is another view for you to do mapping, which is a table view. If I change the view, you will be able to see that it's very old-fashioned where you have all the fields in here. You can add new custom field, add a data model from here, search for the field, map the field to the contact. I prefer the other view instead, the visual view. Going back to our hands-on exercise, we reviewed the mapping for Salesforce contact and we have resolved the warning as well. The next, let's create a mapping for contact identifier with party identification. So in this hands-on, we have done the work where we know contact identifier will be mapped to party identification. In real life scenarios, in projects, you have to find the DMO yourself. Which standard data model object are you going to map the data to? So I'm going to click on save and close. This will close and take you back to the data lake object. I'm going to go and select a different data lake object. This time it's going to be contact identifier right here. I have 11 records. I do not have any mapping. If you see, previously we had to review the mapping. Now we have to create the mapping by ourselves. So I'm going to click on start. You have all the fields on the left. Now you need to select the data model. So this is a view where you start from scratch to, first of all, identify which data model object do you want to pick out, then go in, get the data model, and then start the mapping. You will see somewhere a message that Einstein is working behind the scenes to map the data together. Einstein, or I would say the Salesforce system, will look behind the scenes to make sure if you have similar fields in your source and your target, in your DLOs and your DMOs, it's trying to map them automatically. That's what it's trying to say. Now you have standard data model objects. you have custom data model objects. I'm going to stick with standard at this point in time and search for party identification. I can click on plus. I can add multiple data model objects if I want to from the screen. So I can search for party identification. I can also search for contact point address, click on plus and add them together. In this use case, I only want to bring party identification. As I click on done, you'll see party identification right in here. There will be a warning, which means you'll not be able to perform identity resolution and certain other things if you do not map identification name, number, party, and party identification type. And that's the reason why we perform the transformation in the first place. I'll also not be able to save anything because I need to provide a primary key. So the first thing is to go and find the primary key. In this case, we have party identification ID as the primary key. For Salesforce contact identifier, we have a Salesforce record ID. Hence, this becomes your party identification ID, the primary key. Then I'm going to look at identification. If I search for identification, I get identification name, identification number, and party identification type. I can map these three fields easily from the data lake object. I do have identifier name, which maps with identification name. I have identifier number, which maps with identification number. And I have identifier type, which maps with identification type. Lastly, I do not want to map SFDC organization ID or system timestamp, but I do want to map contact. And for mapping contact, it's a relationship with party. I'm going to click on contact and create a relationship with party. Remove the filter, and now you can see the contact is mapped to party, identifier name to identification name, and all the relevant fields are mapped at this point in time. You will see the warning is gone. And if I click on save, this will save and generate the field mappings as well. And the error will be gone as well. You can realize it's easy to create, it's easy to configure Data Cloud many a times, but it's difficult, or I would say it's important to identify what we are mapping to, what we are trying to achieve in Data Cloud. Hence, doing the pre-work, doing things outside of Data Cloud is equally important to do it right as it is important to perform the configurations in the correct way within Data Cloud. I'm going to click on save and close. Unexpected map DLO should not attempt to remove field mapping. It happens sometimes. If I refresh the screen or if I close simply, you will see that the data is mapped. If I go back, it'll say the data is mapped. I've seen that error a few times where if you have saved something and if you're trying to save and close, it still thinks that it hasn't mapped or something is not right behind the scenes. But if you're confident that the save is complete, you can close and you can come back and replay a mapping as well. So in this scenario, you mapped contact identifier to party identification DMO. That's exactly right. Yes, that's what we did. We mapped contact identifier data lake object to party identification data model object. The next, we are going to map parking space DLOs to a custom parking space DMO. So we cannot find any parking space data model object, hence we are going to map it to a custom DMO. All right, now we need to map a parking space. So I'll go to parking space. The category is other. As you can see, if I click on start the mapping, we're going to naturally try to find the object first within standard. We're pretty certain we are not going to find any standard data model object. Hence, we are going with a custom data model object. So in standard data model object, if I search for parking, or if I search for space, it just shows me learner campus space activity, which definitely not something I'm looking for. It's very much relevant to education. Hence, I'm going to go to custom data model and create a new custom object. I'd already have two for some other reason. I'm going to create a new custom object because this knows with the context, this knows that I'm trying to create a mapping for parking space. It has already done a lot of work for me, which is providing the name of the object, providing the API name, the category will be equal to the category of a data lake object, and the fields as well. If I don't need all the fields, I can just mark it as unchecked. I don't think I can mark as charging station available, data source object, parking space ID, and record ID. That's all I need at this point in time. I don't really need SFDC organization ID. I do not need a system mod stamp. There is also a section or a space called enable value suggestions. I'm going to select it for charging space station available. This is relevant when we are going to the next stage of segmentation and activation. You will be able to see the value. So Data Cloud will be able to suggest a value when you type in. So enable value suggestions is only available for text data type, and it will just show you unique values within that data, within that attribute when you're trying to use it in segmentation. I'm going to click on save. And the mapping should be done automatically for you for some of them, which makes sense because the field names are same, charging station available, parking space ID, and record ID is same as these three. And I'll click on save, which should save the mapping, and we are good to go. So sometimes creating a custom data model is not so difficult, and the mapping will be done automatically for you, which is a benefit. But we always should use standard data model as much as possible and wherever you can. We're going to do the similar exercise for parking reservation. We know that parking reservation is also not a standard data model object. Hence, I'm going to find data lake object for parking reservation, click on start, and perform the same exercise. We have more fields in here than the parking space, but again, Data Cloud, while creating a custom data model object from here, will pre-populate a lot of things for us. It knows the context, it knows what are we trying to do. Again, going back to custom data model, click on new custom object. And the parking reservation object name, API name is already there. The object category is engagement. The category will be equal to the category that we have in data lake objects. Within fields, I do want to select a contact, data source. I don't want system mod stamp and SFDC organization ID. Besides that, I want every other field. And I can perform enable value suggestions for reservation status. Click on save. And again, the mapping should be done for us in here. So we have contact, map to contact, end date, parking space, record ID, reservation status, and start date. I'll click on save and close. So far we have done contact identifier, parking space, parking reservation. The last thing we have to do is review the case mappings as well. Why did you select the parking enable value suggestion for that value? Think of it like a pick list scenario, Rasab, where if you select this enable value suggestions for any of the field, and you can only select it for the text field, at a certain stage when we are doing a segmentation and when we are performing filters, if you select this field, the value for these fields will be shown to you in a drop down or more like a search text. So you don't have to think about those values at that point in time, especially if you're going to use it for segmentation and if they're going to be common values like yes and no or statuses, etc. So Data Cloud doesn't really have concept of pick list, but this is how they are trying to provide a better usage during segmentation or filtering for some of the fields, especially for text. That is right. What we do here will be more clearer during segmentation, but think of it like a lookup where you are searching for it and you're being suggested the values, or a pick list where you can search across. Now I'm going to click on case and review the case mapping. Most of the mapping should be done for us, such as your case ID is mapped to the case ID in here. The case number is mapped, primary, status, type, subject is mapped. The two fields which shouldn't be mapped is CSAT because these are custom fields. And I may not have any CSAT field even within in here. So I'm going to click on unmapped fields. So it shows me all the unmapped fields for that particular data model object. I'm going to click on add new field. And this is a new custom field for this is a new custom field for the standard data model object. So that's an option as well, where if you don't have a field, you can create a field in the standard data model object. I'm going to click on save and search for CSAT in here. Search for, I found CSAT, map them together and click on save. And there should be another field called subtype. I don't think we have anything called subtype within data model object. We do have subtype custom field, which we created for this use case. And we scroll down and click on add new field again. And this time it's subtype. The data type is text. And hence I have an option to enable the value suggestion. If I choose number or any other field, I'll not have this option. It's only available for text. Save and search for subtype. And again, subtype in here. Mapping subtype to the subtype. And there we go. We have the two mappings available as well. And you'll also be able to see the label called custom. So CSAT and subtype are the custom fields versus all the other fields are standard and already being mapped. I'm going to click on save and close. So now we have performed the mapping for all the objects that we brought along from Salesforce. Contact identifier, parking space, parking reservation, parking reservation in here, cases. Now let's go ahead and review the relationships. The first relationship we want to see is between case and a contact. The second relationship we want to see is contact and the party identification, or individual and a party identification. And the third relationship we want to see is within the parking reservation. The parking reservation should have a relationship with the parking space, but also with an individual. Now, this is a point where we are starting to define the relationships. And for relationships, we have to go to the data model. Now, relationships are defined at the data model object level, not with the data lake or data source object level. It's only at the data model object level. So if I click on individual, or let's say if I click on cases, this is a standard data model object view where you'll be able to see the type of the DMO. Is it mapped? How many streams is it mapped to? Because one DMO can be mapped to multiple data streams and data lakes. The fields, standard fields that are available in here. And finally, the relationship. So right now, the relationship is with account and with a case. If you see there's no relationship with an individual, we need to create a relationship with an individual as well. So I'm going to click on edit and click on add new. By default, the object will always be case because we are in the context of case DMO. You can select a field. Which field is it that you want to map it to? For us, it was contact, account contact. Just a second. That's another part where you need to know which fields have been mapped so that we can create a relationship. Remember, relationship will always work if we have done the mapping correctly. So if I go to case again and try to review the relationship, the contact field from Salesforce case, the contact field from Salesforce field is actually mapped to account contact in here. It could have been mapped to individual as well, but we brought it as a data model. It mapped to account contact. We can add a mapping to individual, which makes sense. So I'm going to add a mapping to individual as well. The contact ID is mapped to individual. Contact ID is mapped to individual, and all these are just text fields. So it doesn't really make an impact. If I don't map it to individual in the relationship, I can just choose account and contact and map it to individual or define the relationship as such. Just for simplicity, I have mapped the account contact ID to account contact and to individual as well. Click on save, and now I'll go back and I'll define the relationship. So your Salesforce case has many-to-one relationship to the contact, or your case DMO in Data Cloud has many-to-one relationship to your individual DMO. So in here, I'm going to click on edit relationships again, click on a new relationship. This time, select where is the individual. We click on cancel and refresh. And go to relationships again. Okay, so look, it's already created a relationship because I have created a mapping. Now your case, on the case, the field individual has many-to-one relationship with the individual DMO using the individual ID. So foreign key on case is a primary key on an individual DMO. That's how the relationships are defined in Data Cloud. Now, in this case, the relationship is defined automatically because it's a standard data model object. As long as we are mapping the fields, it will automatically update the relationship most of the time, 95% of the time. But it's still a good idea to come here and have a look whether the relationships have been done correctly or not. So that's for case. Let's move on from case to party identification. So you have party identification. And if I click on relationships, and it'll allow me, I should be able to see a relationship from party identification using a party field to individual DMO using an individual ID. Again, a foreign key for party identification, primary key for individual DMO. Right here. Party identification object, the field is primary key, has many-to-one relationship with individual DMO using the individual ID. So the relationship is there, that means the mapping is there, mapping is available. Okay, going back to data model. Now we have looked at cases, we have looked at parking reservation. The next relationship was within parking, sorry, we have looked at party identification. The next is parking reservation. Because it's a custom DMO, I don't think the relationships will be there. Hence, we have to go in and define the relationship by ourselves. And it's a similar relationship. If you look at the Salesforce CRM, the parking reservation was looking up to contact, also looking up to the parking space. That's exactly what we have to do in here. Okay, if I go to relationships, there are no relationships because it's a custom DMO. I'll click on new and add a new relationship. Object is parking reservation. The field is contact. Cardinality is n=1. Remember, there's no 1:n because it's just the other way around. You have 1:1 and n=1. There's no 1:n, at least in terms of configuration. Then you're going to select the related object in Data Cloud, which is your individual. Individual is related to parking reservation using an individual ID. So a foreign key on parking reservation is a primary key in individual ID. That's one relationship. Second relationship is with parking space. So your parking space foreign key has n=1 relationship with a parking space DMO using a record ID. Always use a record ID, not the parking space ID. Parking space ID is the name of the parking space, A1, A2, A3, etc. Versus what we bring from Salesforce CRM is actually the Salesforce ID, 18-digit ID. So always use a record ID in this case. So a foreign key on parking reservation, primary key in parking space. Click on save and close. It will save the relationship and it will close it in here. It's processing. You should be able to see the relationships as soon as the processing is complete. I don't have to wait for it. I can go back to data model object. It's all happening asynchronously. And I can see the status in here once the status is ready. This is how we define a mapping. We define a relationship. Once the relationship is defined and the status is ready, we'll be able to go from list view to a graph view. That's only available in data model object, where you can switch from a list view to a graph view. And the graph view will give you a visual representation of the relationships that we have defined within Data Cloud. So in here, if you see the individual, and as you click on it, it will just highlight the relationship that it is applicable for. It's quite good. It's quite handy if you want to know more about the relationships in itself. The categories are profile, engagement, and others. Where if I click on individual, we can see individual is related to a party identification, contact point phone, contact point email, address, case, and parking reservation at this point in time. If I look for parking reservation, it's related to individual and parking space. Similarly, contact point email, identification, cases, I'll be able to see the relationships in a graphical format. We'll go back to the list view and go back to a hands-on exercise. So we have completed a hands-on exercise for Salesforce CRM. Now let's quickly go back to hands-on exercise for AWS, where we have to map the AWS S3 customer, email address list, and identifier list, because these are the data model object, these are the DLOs that we created using a transformation. And finally mapping the products, sales orders, and sales order line items from AWS. For that, I'll go back to data lake objects. I'll search for AWS S3 customers first of all. I'll click on start because again, we have to start from scratch for the mappings for these ones and select the object. I have to search for individual and contact point phone. So individual and contact point phone are the two which we are going to map from here. Email address is something where we have a separate list altogether. Identifier is also where we have a list already available. So individual and contact point phone. Click on done. Now this time I've selected two data models at the same time. Because the first name, last name, and the salutation were the same, all three things have come across directly. I do also want individual ID. So customer ID will be mapped to individual ID, primary key to primary key. So I have customer ID, first name, last name, salutation. I think these are the only fields which are needed for individual. For contact point, on the other hand, I do need to find the primary key contact point phone ID. I'm going to use the same ID, customer ID here, because the phone number, there's just one phone number. There's no chances of overriding if I choose the same primary key as well. The second thing I'm going to do is search for E 164 formatted phone number, because that's a mandatory thing for us to relate to or map to if we have to perform segmentation, identity resolution, and activation. We are planning to do all of it. So your mobile number goes to formatted E164 phone number. And finally, we need party. Party, again, is your customer ID. Customer ID is it's your unique identifier for customers. Hence, customer ID will be utilized as party all across. And customer ID is the ID of an individual in here. Right. Can you please elaborate more on how you decide which fields needs to be mapped where? Sure. So for individual, it's quite straightforward. First name, last name, salutation. For the primary key, the aim is the primary key in the AWS customers or your customer database should map to an individual ID in your database of individual. So that's one consideration which I had to take care of. From a contact point phone point of view, I do know that there is a primary key. The primary key needs to be mapped to a unique identifier. Because customer ID and mobile number has a one-to-one relationship, there are no 3 or 4 mobile numbers. Hence, I can confidently use the customer ID, which is a primary key on the customers, as a primary key for contact point phone. If it was a scenario for email addresses, we would have done the same transformation again, Rasab, where your unique ID becomes customer ID plus your mobile number. Wasn't the case for mobile number in this case. And how do you map the mobile phone to formatted E64? That's where Data Cloud gave me suggestion that I need to use formatted E164 phone number. That's a mandatory field to map if I want to perform identity resolution. And we do look forward to performing an identity resolution in this case. But again, I'm not making these decisions on the fly. It seems like that for the demonstration, but we have actually given it thought and we have created a data dictionary out of it. So the discussion always goes back to data dictionary. You have to make sure and create a data dictionary before you start performing configuration. Configuration is very easy that you are almost tempted to start with configuration, but the consequences are a lot more, especially when you start ingesting large volume of data and started consuming the credit points. So we have mapped AWS S3 customers to individual and contact point phone. Next, let's look at email address list and identifier list. Now, email address list is the data lake object, which is being populated or filled using data transform. So it only has 3 things: email, email address key, and the party. When I click on start, I have to select the data model. In this case, it will be contact point email because that's the reason why we did the transformation. I should be able to search for email address, contact point email, add it, and then perform the mapping. Contact point email, click on the plus icon, click on done. And party is already being mapped to party because that's the same field name. If I search for email address, the email goes into the email address, and your contact point email ID, which is a unique key, goes into the email address key. So we already knew about this mapping upfront. That's hence we did the transformation where we need the we needed the unique identifier, and party and email concatenation is a unique identifier. The primary key goes into the primary key, email address goes into the email, and party is to party. So this is a decision that we took when we were performing a transformation. And that's the same thing with if I go to identifier list, that should be the same thing where we already know the name, number, type are the mandatory fields. Key will be related to the primary key, and party is something which you need to relate to the party field. Is it always a rule that the map a primary key to a primary key? Yes, Rasab, most of the time you can map the primary key to somewhere else as well, but mapping primary key to primary key is important because you need to maintain the uniqueness across DLOs, in fact, in DMOs as well. But you can map the primary key to a foreign key as well. So a primary key in data lake object can also be a foreign key somewhere else. So for email case scenario, um, or let's think of a case scenario where case primary key, not really. I'll give you a better example where the primary key is being mapped to both the places. Contact point phone, which we just did. So contact point phone has a primary key because we had one-on-one relationship of contact ID with the phone number. There's no duplication in there. We mapped the contact ID, Salesforce contact ID to contact point phone as a primary key. That was a primary key to primary key relationship. Not necessarily it needed to be, but because we found there'll be no duplicates, we mapped it. But also the contact ID, the primary key from your source, from your DLO is mapped to party, which is your data model object. So that's an example where the primary key can be mapped to the primary key, but as well as to any other foreign key as well, if you need to. Now here, identifier list is all about party identification. Hence, I've selected party identification as a DMO. There is a warning, but we know it needs to map identification name, number, and type. And we already have fields for it. So I'm going to search for identification name, number, and type. You also have party identification ID, which is a primary key. I'll map the primary key with the primary key and remove the filters. Now, at this point in time, all the 5 fields are mapped to the other 5 fields. I don't have to worry about the relationships because I've already reviewed the relationships of party identification with individual, contact point phone with individual, and etc. So I don't really have to worry about the relationships because they are different DLOs, but we are mapping them to same DMOs. Okay, I'll go back to our hands-on. We have mapped AWS S3 customers, email address list, identifier list. Now let's look at the other 3 data items that we brought across, which was AWS products, the AWS S3 products. We have to start the mapping for that as well. Now for this, we have a standard DMO available. I think that's master product, if I'm not wrong. Product master DLO will go into goods product DMO. So you have goods product data model object, standard data model object being available. And we do have a mapping in here as well. So I'm going to go ahead and search for goods product, select it, and click on done. Now the product name is already mapped to product name. I do need to find the primary key, which is goods product ID. I'm going to map the primary key from my source to goods product ID directly. Now, as soon as I map the primary key, I can save the mapping. So I can save the draft and move forward from there, but I need at least the primary key, the mandatory fields to be mapped to the DMO. I need to select for category. So I do have product category being mapped to primary product category. I do need to look for subcategory. Do not find anything as such. Hence, I'm going to add a new field. I have to save the mapping before I add a new field. So if I click on here, it'll show me warning that I have unsaved mapping. I have to click on save first and then continue with creating a new custom field. So I'm going to select subcategory, text, enable value suggestions. save. And the new field should be here, subcategory, product subcategory is being mapped to subcategory in here. Now, all I need is an information about price. I don't find anything with a price in here, which is actually a number. I'm going to search for amount, and you can see I've received a lot of amounts. I'm going to map the product price with MSRP amount. Now, of course, you'll have a question, how am I deciding the MSRP amount? I'm going to look at the, let's say, goods product demo, data cloud. Again, this goes back to how we decided to select goods product, and at that point in time, we must have searched for the fields as well. So the fields have information such as your minimum advertisement amount, advertisement currency, MSRP amount, which is the manufacturer suggested retail price or default price of the product. That's how I made a decision of mapping the product price with MSRP amount. I had to look at everything, and this is the best which I can find to map the product price onto the goods product. Once I'm comfortable here, I'll click on save and close. So now we have mapped AWS S3 products. The next two are S3 order header and order line items. So if I click on order header and click on start mapping, I should be able to search for sales orders and should be able to. Also, if you do the mapping wrong initially, can you go back and fix it, right? Yeah, you can go back and fix it. That's right. You can delete the field mapping. You can delete the DMO altogether if you would like to. Yes, that's possible. I'm going to search for sales order. So look, I have sales order and I have sales order product, which is good. I'm going to select sales order right now. The total amount is being mapped to total amount. I should have a status as well, which is order status. So status being mapped to sales order status. Order ID should be mapped to order ID, but I have date time ordered, which can go to order start date. I have order ID. Yeah, sales order ID is a primary key. I'm going to map order ID, which is a primary key, to the sales order ID. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4 fields mapped. Loyalty points and customer ID are two things which we need to map. Customer ID, I don't think we're going to find anything called individual. It's usually a sold to customer. Again, how I understand it and how I made a decision that your customer ID, which is an individual ID, is being mapped to a sold to customer. It's by documentation. So if I go and search for sales order DMO, I will be able to see the relationships. So your sold to order is actually related to individual by many to one relationship. And in our use case, we have mapped the customer onto individual. So it makes sense to map the customer ID to a sales sold to customer in here. And finally, the loyalty points. There is no field which says loyalty points accrued. Hence, we are going to create a custom field to store the loyalty points coming from sales order into a data model object. Loyalty points accrued, and that's a number. Click on save. Your loyalty points accrued being added in here in a custom field. And if I remove the filter, I've mapped all the fields in here to a data model object. Hence, I'm going to click on save and close. The last mapping we have is sales order line item. Sales order headers, and sales order line item. Now is that, let me look at all the data lake objects. Yeah, sales order line item, and I'll perform the mapping. Now we know we have sales order product as a standard data model object. And so I'm going to pick that one up and map accordingly. There's one more thing to notice in here with engagement data lake objects. You have two mandatory fields to map. One is your primary key and other is your event ID. You need to map both of them. Sales order product, click on plus icon, click on done. There are 97 fields, but we are not going to map all of them. I'm going to find the ID first. So order sales order product primary key. The primary key goes into the primary key. The next I'm going to search for is ID. If I have order ID, if not, then I'm going to search for sales order. So your sales order is a lookup relationship to order ID. The reason I know is by documentation. Then you have quantity. I'll map ordered quantity to order quantity. Yeah, product ID. So we should have goods product or product in here. Product ID will go into product. And you have order date or search for date. So you have created date, promised date, requested date. You can use any of them. I can use a created date, for instance, as a date time ordered. I can also go ahead and create a custom field if I want to have ordered date as a specific custom field with a label that I look for. In this case, I'm going to go ahead with the created date as the order date time created. And the last field we have is subtotal. So again, I'm going to search for amount, and I'm going to map it to list price amount. So subtotal amount is going to be mapped to list price amount. I do have a lot of fields in here. I'm just picking list price amount because I've seen the documentation, but when you see a documentation and from which industry lens you're looking at, you might come up with a different field mapping, and that's okay. This field mapping is for you and for your organization. Even if you map, different organizations will have different ways of mapping, and that's okay. This will not impact your unification, segmentation, activation at all, and in Data Cloud. So click on save and close. We have mapped all the data lake objects to data model objects. Now, the last thing which I'll do for this class is go back to sales order and make sure the mapping is available from sales order to individual and also to sales order product. If I go to relationships, you can see that there's a mapping of sales order product. Sales order field is mapped in many on one to sales order, which is good. But if you look at the standard Salesforce documentation, you also have a mapping from sold to customer to individual. I've seen this one failing almost every time, where there is a documentation, but it doesn't really brings it by itself, even though we map the right field. So we select sales order sold to customer, N is to one relationship with individual using an individual ID. This is a relationship which I have to come at every time in the trainings, but also during live projects, and make sure it's there. If not, relate the sales order with the customer using the relationships in here. And once this is ready, you'll be able to see the graphs, that the graphs is updated, where your individual is also related to sales order now. Previously, it was not. And your sales order is related to sales order product. Your sales order product is related to goods product and sales order. This is a very good view where you'll be able to realize the relationships between standard and custom data model objects.